I didn't cry when my mother died. I cried when I read the will. It came in a cream-colored envelope. No name on the front, just a return address I didn't recognize. I opened it while standing in the kitchen, the soft hum of the fridge filling the silence like background music to a life I didn't choose but learned to manage. The words were polite, hollow. It stated the obvious, Margaret Whitman, deceased. Then the unexpected, though deep down I already knew. My name wasn't there. Eric got the house, the savings, and the car. Jenna got the jewelry, some keepsakes, and the family piano she never learned to play. Me. I got the envelope. I read it twice. The first time to understand. The second to confirm I hadn't imagined it. There was no anger at first, just a strange kind of numbness, like someone had turned off the sound in the room. I sat down, stared at the kitchen tiles, and remembered what she used to say anytime I asked for anything, even as a child. You always figure things out, Claire. You're strong. You'll be fine. I was 8 the first time she said it, 39 when I realized what it actually meant. It meant don't ask for help. Don't expect softness. Don't expect to matter. I drove to the lawyer's office 2 days later because Aunt Cheryl insisted on a formal reading. Your mother would have wanted that, she said, like that was supposed to make it easier. The room smelled like old paper and carpet cleaner. Eric walked in late, still wearing a jacket that cost more than my monthly rent. Jenna sat on the edge of her seat, eyes red, hands fidgeting. Aunt Cheryl brought baked goods. Of course she did. When the lawyer read the document, no one looked at me. Not even once. It was like watching a silent play from the back row, present but invisible. Eric didn't even flinch when his name came up next to the property title. Jenna gasped when she got the piano like it was a crown jewel. Me. I folded my hands and kept my face still. Years of practice. Years of being the one who didn't make a scene. Afterward, Cheryl patted my hand and said, "You were always the strong one. Your mother didn't mean anything by it." I smiled because that's what you do when your insides are burning and no one smells the smoke. I walked to my car in silence, the cold wind slicing through my coat. Sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, not moving, not crying, just frozen. Later that night, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in months. Inside was my father's old wristwatch, the only thing I kept after he passed. It had stopped years ago, the hands forever paused at 7:46. So I wore it sometimes, not for time but for memory. He hadn't protected me, but at least he hadn't erased me. The next morning I woke up to sunlight spilling through the blinds. For a second I forgot everything. Then the envelope flashed back into my mind like a migraine. I made coffee, sat at the window, watched the street come alive, joggers, delivery vans, neighbors walking dogs. All those small lives, unknowing, untouched. I wondered how many of them had been disinherited without ever being named. I scrolled through old messages from my mother. None of them said, "I love you." Most were reminders. Doctor appointments, family dinners, passive-aggressive remarks wrapped in civility. "Jenna's struggling again. Maybe you could check in. Eric's having a rough month. Any chance you can float him a little support?" Not once did she say, "Thank you." I deleted the whole thread. Felt lighter immediately. Like removing splinters you'd forgotten were stuck under the skin. That afternoon I got a call. Eric's name lit up the screen. I stared at it for a while. Let it ring. Let it stop. He didn't leave a voicemail. I thought maybe he was calling to apologize. Or explain. Or at least acknowledge that the will was a punch in the gut. But he didn't call back. Instead the silence sat there like furniture. Familiar. Heavy. Unmovable. That night, I lay in bed and tried to remember the last time my mother hugged me without condition. Without a sigh. Without the invisible weight of what she thought I owed her. I couldn't. The truth was, this didn't start with the will. It started decades ago. In every moment I was told to be strong. Every time I was praised for not needing help. Every time I was given responsibility instead of affection. This wasn't about money. This was about mattering. And now, the ink had finally dried on what I'd always feared. I was useful, not loved. The next day Eric called again. This time I picked up. Not out of curiosity. Out of completion. His voice was casual, like we hadn't just confirmed I didn't exist in our mother's final ledger. "Hey, I know things have been weird," he said, "but we're counting on you to cover the funeral expenses. Just to keep things dignified, you know?" My mouth went dry. I didn't speak. He kept talking. Words like graceful, simple, and just help out this once floated through the line. I listened. Then I hung up. The silence I'd learned is a full sentence. Funny how they forget you until they need something. Forget your birthday. Forget your silence. Forget your boundaries. But the second there's a price to pay, suddenly they remember your number. Eric's second call came the following morning. I didn't answer. The voicemail started with the usual charm he put on like cologne. "Hey Claire, hope you're okay." Then the shift. We're really trying to organize everything quickly. Mom deserves a proper send-off. I mean, it's complicated with Jenna and everything, but I figured you'd want to help. Just let me know if you can cover the funeral deposit. I replayed it twice. Not once did he say, I know this is unfair. Not once did he mention the will. Just proper and help, and the subtle implication that it was my role, again, to show up, to fill in the cracks, to keep the structure from collapsing. I didn't call back. That afternoon a text came in from Jenna. 3 paragraphs long, full of softness and implied shame. We're all hurting right now. I know things weren't perfect with Mom, but this isn't the time to be distant. I just want us to be a family. Please don't make this about money. Make it about money? I almost laughed. It was never about money. It was about value. And the will had already told me what I was worth. Nothing. Still, I stared at her message longer than I wanted to admit. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I typed. I'm not the bank. Deleted it. Typed. She left me out of the will. What else do you want? Deleted that too. Eventually I put my phone face down and went for a walk. The cold air bit into my coat sleeves. The sky was the kind of gray that made every thought feel heavier. I passed a small flower shop on the corner. Inside, a woman was arranging white lilies, funeral flowers. The coincidence made me pause. For a moment I imagined myself walking in, ordering the largest arrangement, sending it to the funeral out of obligation, and signing the card with nothing but my initials. Then I imagined something better, doing nothing. I walked past the flower shop. When I got home I made tea and pulled out an old shoebox from the top of the closet. Inside were pieces of my life I hadn't touched in years. Photos, letters, receipts from times I paid for things no one remembered. There was a receipt from Eric's second attempt at community college. I'd helped him pay tuition when he couldn't get the loan processed in time. He dropped out a semester later. There was a postcard Jenna had sent from her honeymoon in Hawaii. I'd helped fund part of the wedding when Mom said, we can't let her start her marriage with debt. None of them had ever paid me back. Not in money. Not in gratitude. I dug deeper and found a birthday card from my mother. Maybe 10 years old now. Inside she had written, so proud of the life you've built. We don't worry about you. That was it. That was the sum of it. They didn't worry about me. So they forgot me. That night I sat by the window again. A blanket wrapped around my shoulders. A familiar ache settling into my spine. I thought about how many times I had shown up for people who never once asked how I was managing. I thought about all the holidays I hosted and funded. The hospital visits. The last-minute crises. The emergencies that weren't really emergencies. Just poor planning disguised as tragedy. And through it all I was the stable one. The strong one. The one who made things look easy. So they let me carry the weight and then acted surprised when I grew tired. The thing no one tells you about being reliable is that it becomes your cage. You train people to believe you'll always say yes. And when you finally say no, they act like you've betrayed them. At 11:47 p.m. my phone buzzed. Jenna again. Just one line this time. Mom would want us to come together, Claire. I didn't respond. I looked at the phone for a long time and realized something terrifying. Part of me still wanted to say yes. Still wanted to be chosen. Still wanted to be seen as the good one. Still wanted to be wanted. And that's when I knew the damage went deeper than the will. It had been decades in the making. I closed my eyes, leaned back against the couch and exhaled like I hadn't in years. They didn't see me when I gave. They certainly won't see me now that I've stopped. But maybe that's okay. Because something in me was starting to shift. Not loudly, not with fireworks, but like a door that had been locked for too long, finally creaking open. And I was beginning to ask a question that terrified me more than being left out of a will. What if I just stopped showing up? I was the firstborn. That was my crime. Not one you serve time for in a courtroom. No, this was a sentence that came wrapped in compliments, in expectations, in quiet sacrifices that no one labeled sacrifice. I was the responsible one, the mature one, the one who didn't cry too loudly or ask for too much. And for a while I thought that made me good, loved even, but it didn't. It just made me useful. My mother used to say it with pride, Claire doesn't need reminding, Claire always helps. And I would smile like it was a badge of honor. But I didn't realize then. I was being trained, not nurtured, trained to obey without question, to serve without resentment, to suppress without making a mess. Love in our household came in strange forms. My mother wasn't physically abusive. She was emotionally evasive. Her silence was weaponized. Her praise was selective. Her love, conditional. She loved image. She loved control. She loved Jenna's tears because they made her feel needed. She loved Eric's charm because he reminded her of the version of life she wished she had lived. Me. She loved that I didn't need much. That was my downfall. When I was 10, I cleaned up after my sister's birthday party while Jenna cried over the wrong flavor of cake. When I was 12, I skipped a field trip because Eric forgot his lunch money again and Mom asked if I could just understand this once. When I was 15, I stopped talking about my own feelings entirely because every time I did she'd sigh and say, "Don't be dramatic, Claire. You're not like the others." I wasn't like the others. I was the replacement adult, the emotional sponge, the backup parent, the unacknowledged therapist, and the worst part? I performed so well I started believing that was love, that if I could just keep everything together I'd earn her softness, that if I made her proud enough I'd finally get her affection. But it never came. Instead I got grocery lists, chore charts, gentle dismissals disguised as compliments. "You're our rock. You've always figured things out. You never cause problems." No one saw that I was drowning in the weight of being the strong one. After my father died, things only got worse. He wasn't much of a protector while he was alive, more like a shadow with good intentions. But after he was gone, the balance tipped fully. There was no buffer between me and Margaret's quiet tyranny. Jenna became more fragile, Eric more reckless, and I became indispensable. I was 17 when I first tried to say no. Eric had borrowed money again, this time from a friend, someone with real consequences. I had saved up for a class trip to New York, paid for it myself, every dollar. And when I told my mother I didn't want to give it up, she didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just looked at me and said, "I thought you were better than that." And I gave him the money. The trip happened without me. And no one even remembered that I was supposed to go. I still remember sitting on the porch that week watching the mail truck go by, pretending it was taking me somewhere else. I had this fantasy that one day I'd get a letter addressed to me. Not a bill, not a request, but a letter that said, "I see you. You don't have to hold it all together anymore." It never came, so I kept holding it. Years passed like that, me folding myself smaller so everyone else could feel big, me disappearing so they could shine, me mistaking obedience for love, silence for strength, martyrdom for meaning. Even in adulthood the pattern never broke. I moved out but I never fully escaped. Birthdays, holidays, emergencies. My presence was expected, my absence offensive. I paid for repairs on the house, helped Jenna move, drove Eric to court when his license was suspended. And every time I told myself this will be the last time. But it never was, because guilt runs deeper than blood. And I'd been conditioned since childhood to believe that if I stopped helping, I stopped deserving love. The night after Eric's call, the one where he asked me to pay for the funeral, I had a dream. I was standing in our childhood kitchen. The wallpaper was peeling. The sink was full. The clock on the wall was ticking but the time was wrong. I was trying to speak but no sound came out. Jenna stood crying. Eric paced in the background. My mother sat at the table sipping tea looking at me with that same old expression. Not angry, not kind, just tired. In the dream I finally screamed. And no one looked up. I woke up breathless. My sheets soaked with sweat. The sun had barely risen. But I knew in that moment that I was done. Not because I didn't care, but because caring had nearly broken me. They called it love, but it only moved when I did. No, I was standing still. Everyone kept saying it wasn't personal. "That's just how these things go," Aunt Cheryl offered over the phone, her voice syrupy and too calm, like she was reading from a script she'd rehearsed at other people's funerals. "Your mother didn't mean to hurt you. She just thought you were okay. You're the one with a career. You don't need anything." That's the line that stuck. You don't need anything. And maybe I didn't, not in the way they meant. I had no mortgage, no children, no unpaid credit cards or broken down cars. I didn't call my mother crying about overdraft fees. I didn't ask for bailouts. But I needed something no one ever thought to give. Recognition. Not praise. Just a place in the picture. The will wasn't just a list of legal distributions. It was a mirror. A final confession. And what it reflected was what I'd always feared. That in my family I had been positioned as the emotional scaffolding. The support beams. The background. Useful, dependable but not central. Not grieved when missing. Not cherished, only counted on. She gave Eric everything because he's starting over again. Because he just lost his job. And Jenna? Well, Jenna was always fragile, which in our family meant she got protected, coddled, excused. She was still finding herself, a phrase that somehow stretched from high school into her 30s. Her softness made her deserving. My strength made me dispensable. I wasn't written out of the will out of malice. That's what stung most. It wasn't revenge. It was assumption. I was left out because they thought I didn't need to be in it. Because I'd already proven I'd survive either way. What they didn't understand was that being excluded didn't free me. It erased me. It was the confirmation of every quiet ache I'd carried as a daughter. That I could give and still not be counted. That I could show up for every family event, pay for half the damn thing, hold the emotional center together, And when it came time to measure who mattered, my name didn't even come up. I wasn't heartbroken. I was hollowed. There's a difference. I spent the next day in my apartment not speaking. The silence was sharp, not peaceful. Every time I tried to do something, make lunch, fold laundry, read, I felt like I was moving underwater. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a slow sinking. That evening, I lit a candle on the table and stared at the small flame. My mother loved candles. She used to line them up on the mantel during holidays. Cream-colored ones, never scented. Scented candles are tacky, she'd say. She had a rule for everything. Rules I followed for most of my life. Rules about how daughters should behave. What a good woman looked like. How money was something you gave away quietly. How pain wasn't supposed to leave your mouth. Only your posture. I watched the flame flicker and thought about how I'd become everything she taught me to be. Capable, composed, self-sufficient. And yet somehow that had made me invisible to her. The next morning I went through the legal documents again. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to feel the reality of it pressed down on me again. Needed to know I wasn't imagining the betrayal. It was all there in plain text. The value of the estate. The named beneficiaries. My absence. Neatly typed, notarized, finalized. I reached out to an old friend, Marla, who used to work in estate law. I didn't ask for representation. I didn't want to contest anything. I just asked her one question. Is it normal to cut a child out without explanation? There was a pause on the line. Then she said, no, it's not normal, but it's common. That sentence landed like a thud in my chest. Not normal, but common. Just like being the over-functioning daughter. Just like being punished for being okay. Common, familiar, and still devastating. That afternoon, Eric sent another text. Just a line this time. Have you decided about the funeral cost? No, hi. No, how are you? Just a bill handed to the family accountant. I didn't reply. Jenna followed with another emotionally wrapped plea. It's just hard. Everything feels so wrong. I know Mom made mistakes, but this isn't about the will. It's about honoring her memory. Her memory. I wanted to scream. I wanted to write back. You mean the memory where she told me I was too sensitive every time I asked for respect? The memory where I stood outside in the cold waiting for her to pick me up after school because she forgot? Again? The memory where she called me selfish for asking to keep a bonus check instead of putting it into Eric's mess? But I didn't write anything. Because I knew they wouldn't hear it. They never had. And in that silence, I felt the faintest flicker of power return. Not rage, not revenge, but the early pulse of reclamation. The quiet realization that being left out might hurt, deeply, undeniably, but it didn't mean I had to keep stepping in. I wouldn't fight the will. I wouldn't beg to be written back in, but I would rewrite something else. The story I had been telling myself. The one where love looked like exhaustion, where strength meant invisibility, where mattering was conditional, because inheritance isn't about cash or heirlooms. It's about who gets named when it counts, and I'd spent my whole life being useful without ever being counted. I looked at the clock, 7:46, the same frozen time on my father's old watch. For once I didn't reach for it. I let the stillness be still. Because sometimes not answering is how you start to matter to yourself. Guilt doesn't always scream. Sometimes it sighs. It texts softly. It shows up as a voicemail saying just checking in. It wraps itself in nostalgia. It sounds like, you're the bigger person, or she was still your mother, or don't let this tear us apart. But guilt, when you grow up around it, becomes a leash. And the people holding it, they rarely admit they're tightening it. The next morning I opened the curtains and let the winter light pour into the living room. Dust floated in the air like memories too light to fall. My phone sat on the kitchen counter. 3 unread messages. I didn't open them. I knew their shape already. Guilt doesn't change its handwriting. It just changes senders. I made coffee slowly as if it would delay the weight of the day. As if steam could hold off a storm. The kettle clicked off. The silence after was loud. Jenna's text came first. I know Mom could be hard, but she still cared in her own way. Can't we just come together and make this right? Then Eric. We're falling apart here, Claire. We need you to step up. That word, step up, struck something ancient in me. Like a bell rung in a room I didn't know was still inside me. I'd been stepping up since I could walk. Stepping over my own needs. Stepping around their messes. Stepping into roles no child should have to fill. And now they still saw me as the one who would say yes. Because guilt had always been my cue. I sat at the table with my coffee untouched and remembered a moment I hadn't thought of in years. I was 22. My first job out of college. Entry-level nonprofit. Barely made enough to keep the lights on. One Friday I'd gotten a small bonus, $250, and I had plans. Not grand plans. Just a weekend off, a dinner out, a pair of shoes that didn't have holes in the soles. That same night Eric called, his voice shaking but not from emotion, from manipulation rehearsed too well. Car broke down. I need to fix it, otherwise I can't get to work Monday. I remember hesitating, just long enough that he added, it's fine if you can't. I'll figure something out. Always do. Even if that means losing another job. I sent him the money, and then I cried in the shower. Not because I was broke, but because I realized I'd never get to keep something good for myself without someone calling it selfish. That's what guilt does. It teaches you to apologize for breathing too deeply. It rebrands your boundaries as betrayal. It whispers that love is earned through erosion. And when the people using it look like family, it becomes harder to name. Margaret, my mother, was fluent in guilt. She could wrap it in silence better than most people could wrap it in words. When I was 14, I once asked her why she never came to my school performances. She blinked, paused, and said, "You know how hard I work. I'm sorry I can't do everything. I wish you appreciated what I do show up for." And just like that, I became the one who had asked too much. Years later, when I missed a family barbecue because of a work deadline, she didn't yell. She just left a voicemail saying, "We saved you a plate. I hope your career's more important than your family." Jenna inherited the same tone, a sweetness laced with shame, like honey stirred into vinegar. "Claire, I know you're upset, but we're all hurting. Can't you see that?" Yes, I could see it. I'd always seen it. I'd built my life around it. But no, I was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind of tired that comes from years of mislabeling emotional labor as love. I washed my cup, hands trembling slightly, and looked out the window. Across the street, a man was teaching his daughter how to ride a bike. She kept wobbling. He kept clapping. She fell once and he helped her up, gently brushing off her knees. No scolding. No guilt. Just presence. I turned away, not because I was bitter, but because I had no idea what that kind of parenting felt like. What love looked like when it wasn't tied to performance or sacrifice. My phone buzzed again. "Aunt Cheryl this time. I just think your mother didn't want to burden you. She admired your strength. Be graceful, dear. Families have history. We move forward. Be graceful." Another leash. Velvet but tight all the same. That was the recurring message, wasn't it? Be strong. Be generous. Be graceful. Even when you're cut out. Even when you're the one asked to pay. Even when your grief is quiet, your presence invisible, your name missing from every document that mattered. I stood at the sink for a long while, water running, thinking of every time I'd bent myself into something palatable for the people who claimed to love me. And then I turned off the tap, sat down, opened my journal, and wrote one sentence. Guilt is not love, and I don't owe anyone a performance. I underlined it twice, and I didn't check my phone for the rest of the day. It's strange the way people ask for grace after they've erased you, as if memory is optional, as if history can be rewritten in their tone of voice, as if love was never about what they did, only how well you absorb it. That morning I stood by my apartment window and watched the frost creep up the glass. My breath fogged it slightly. The world outside looked cold but honest, and I realized I hadn't felt that in a long time. Honesty. Not in my family. Not in the way they moved. Everything there was image, performance, choreography. Even grief had a costume. My phone was quiet now. After days of soft demands wrapped in guilt-laced pleasantries, the silence had arrived like a second funeral. Not of my mother, but of their access to me. The moment I stopped responding, they stopped pretending to care. That was the real heartbreak, wasn't it? Not the will, not even the money, but how easily the conversation ended when they realized I wouldn't fund their dignity, that I wouldn't carry the weight they'd always assumed I would, without complaint, without question. It made me think, maybe I was never really in the family. I was in the function. Claire the helper. Claire the strong one. Claire the one who pays. Claire who always shows up even when she's not invited to sit at the table. But Claire the human? Claire the daughter? Claire the one with feelings? She never made the guest list. I remembered the last Thanksgiving we had all been together. My mother had just complimented Eric on finally making something of himself, even though he'd been fired from 3 jobs that year. Jenna had cried because she felt unseen, and the whole room turned to comfort her. I had brought the entire meal, cooked for 12, paid for the groceries, and no one said thank you. That night my mother hugged me at the door and whispered, "You're the glue, Claire. We'd fall apart without you." And still she left me out. I wonder if she thought I'd be too embarrassed to mention it, that I'd keep playing the role even after the curtain had fallen. But here's the thing, grace is not owed, especially not by the erased. It took me 39 years to realize that love without acknowledgement isn't love. It's leverage. And families like mine, they don't mourn you when you walk away. They just replace you with silence and say it was your fault for leaving. I made a simple decision that day. I wouldn't fight. I wouldn't explain. I would do what they never expected. I would preserve myself, because grace without boundaries isn't grace. It's surrender. The funeral was a performance. Everything from the framed photo on the altar, the one where my mother smiled with a softness I barely remember, to the white lilies that filled the church with a scent so strong it felt like it was trying to cover something up. It wasn't grief. It was the scent of denial, of curated sorrow, of making sure the outside world believed this was a close-knit, grieving family. It was never about mourning. It was about maintaining the story. Aunt Cheryl was already there when I arrived, dressed in pearl earrings and judgment. She kissed my cheek and whispered, "Thank you for showing up. I know this must be complicated for you." Complicated. As if being disinherited wasn't betrayal, just an inconvenience. As if showing up wasn't a wound reopening but an act of grace. As if standing in a room where everyone expected me to play daughter without having ever been treated like one wasn't a performance in itself. Eric was talking to the priest like he'd been devoted. Like he hadn't ghosted Mom for months at a time unless he needed something. He wore our father's watch. The one Mom insisted he take after Dad died. The one that used to sit on Dad's bedside table for years untouched. That watch had history. He had no idea what time it held. Jenna came over, eyes already glistening. "I'm just glad we're all here," she whispered. "That means something, right?" I didn't answer. What did it mean? That I was still the one who showed up even after being erased in ink? That I was still expected to comfort everyone else? As if the betrayal in the will didn't count because it was written with clean language? The service started. A slideshow rolled through years of photographs, birthday parties, vacations, family dinners. In every image, Eric smiled like he owned the room. Jenna clung to someone. Me. I was either holding the camera or holding someone else's coat. The priest said Margaret was a loving mother, a woman of strength and tradition, someone who held her family together. I sat there, hands folded, jaw locked. She didn't hold us together. I did. But no one wrote eulogies for daughters who carry the weight silently. There are no words for the ones who gave everything and still ended up cut out. After the final prayer, people moved toward the casket. I stayed seated, not out of protest but out of honesty, because even the way she was being remembered felt like a lie I no longer had the energy to perform. I didn't go to the burial. I slipped out quietly after the service, before the final hymn, before the procession of hugs and platitudes. I didn't want condolences from people who didn't know the full story, who only knew Margaret Whitman as a pillar of grace, not the woman who raised her children with distance and favoritism dressed up as discipline. I didn't need anyone telling me how strong I was. I was done being strong for other people. The sky outside the chapel was heavy with low clouds, threatening rain but never delivering. I stood under the stone archway and watched as black-clad figures emerged, heads bowed, some crying softly. I wondered if they were crying for her, or for themselves, for what they'd lost, for what they never got, for what was never said. But me, I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel anything but because I had cried for years already. Quiet, private grief. The kind that builds up when you're constantly overlooked. The kind that hardens you over time, not into bitterness, but into understanding. Understanding that silence is sometimes louder than confrontation. That stepping back can be more powerful than storming out. That absence, when chosen, is its own kind of statement. I walked to my car without saying goodbye to anyone. I didn't check my phone. I knew the messages would come. Jenna, maybe Aunt Cheryl, maybe even Eric pretending to soften. They would all say some version of the same thing. "You didn't stay. You didn't say anything. That was cold." But here's the truth they never understood. I had spent my entire life explaining myself to people who never really listened, who twisted my words into weapons, who took my silence as compliance, who acted like my calm meant I wasn't hurting. So this time I didn't explain. I let the silence do the talking. Because silence, unlike words, can't be misquoted. When I got home, I changed out of the black dress and into something soft, gray sweatpants, a worn sweater. I made tea not because I needed it but because it was an act of care I could give to myself without expectation. For once, I didn't have to earn comfort. I didn't have to deserve rest. I opened the letter drawer in my desk and pulled out the envelope I had written 5 years ago. Addressed to Mom, never sent. I had written it after one of our colder phone calls, when she had dismissed my exhaustion with a tight, "Well, you've always liked playing the victim." That night, I had sat at the kitchen table and poured every restrained scream into that page. I never mailed it. I don't think I ever intended to, but I kept it. I lit a match and burned it in the sink, watched the paper curl and blacken, watched years of invisible pain rise as smoke. There was no ceremony, no dramatic music, just the quiet crackle of flame and the hum of my own breath. It didn't fix everything, The ache was still there, dull, familiar, like a bruise I'd stopped pressing. But it did something else. It gave me permission to let go, to stop waiting for them to acknowledge me, to stop searching for closure in people who benefited from my silence. That night I didn't answer Eric's text, or Jenna's voicemail, or Aunt Cheryl's email titled Family Matters, because sometimes not responding is the most honest thing you can do. And sometimes the silence you choose is the only grace you'll ever get back. People think the hardest part about being left out of the will is the money, the inheritance, the material, but the real cost, the real wound, it's emotional, it's existential, it's waking up and realizing, I was never the one they were planning for. They planned for Eric, because he always needed rescuing. They planned for Jenna, because she always needed soothing. But me, they assumed I'd be fine, that I didn't need support, that I'd keep standing no matter what they gave or didn't. And maybe I did keep standing. But the cost was me. It was the trip I never took because I was wiring rent money to my brother. It was the business I never started because I was helping Jenna plan a wedding she couldn't afford. It was the hours I spent driving to check on Mom after her bad days, even though she never once visited me when I moved out. It was every time I canceled therapy because something in the family fell apart and needed fixing. It was every time I swallowed the lump in my throat because being too emotional would make things harder for everyone else. They didn't see that cost. They didn't tally it up, because when the one who always holds it together finally breaks, no one is there to catch her. I sat at my kitchen table that morning, bills open, calculator blinking. I had more than enough to pay for the funeral, even after the rent, the groceries, the medical copay I'd been putting off. But it wasn't about whether I could pay. It was about whether I should. Because this wasn't about money. It was about principle. About being asked to give again after already being told in legal ink that I didn't count, that I wasn't worthy of a mention, that my care, my labor, my loyalty had an expiration date. I thought about how many times in my life I'd been the fallback plan, the emergency contact, the name on the dotted line, the one who drove people to rehab or stayed up late helping Jenna rewrite resumes she never submitted, the one who knew where Mom kept her medications, who booked her doctor's appointments, who sat with her in the emergency room and still got told she was distant. They never said thank you. They just assumed it was love. But love without reciprocity is just expectation. And expectation without acknowledgement is exploitation. I thought about sending a message back, about spelling it all out in cold, clear terms. You don't get to erase me and still expect my sacrifice. But I didn't send it, because they didn't need more of my words. They needed my absence. That was the cost they never expected to pay. So I wrote one check. One time. Not out of love, not out of guilt, but to close the book. Basic cremation. No flowers. No reception. Just dignity. The kind I was never given but still believe every human deserves. I sent the receipt to Eric, one line beneath it, paid in full. Where even now, no one replied, and I didn't need them to, because the cost had already been paid, in years of silence, swallowed pain, and dreams I'd put on hold to play the strong one. I wasn't paying for a funeral. I was paying for freedom. Grace doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like choosing not to carry the weight anymore. Not because it wasn't heavy, but because you finally learned it was never yours to hold. I didn't go back to the family home after the funeral. I didn't help Eric clean out closets or Jenna decide what to keep. I didn't ask what happened to Mom's jewelry or the antique tea set she promised me years ago in a rare moment of warmth. I let it all go. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because some things are too stained to bring home. I spent that weekend in silence. No phone calls. No emails. Just quiet. The kind that used to scare me but now felt like peace. I cooked dinner for one, played music that didn't remind me of anyone, and cleaned the apartment slowly like a ritual, like washing away someone else's fingerprints from my life. I took out the last box I had of family things. Old birthday cards, a photo of me and Dad fishing, a Christmas ornament Mom gave me when I was 16. I didn't throw them away, but I didn't display them either. I wrapped each item gently, not out of sentimentality, but out of respect for the girl I used to be. The girl who wanted so badly to be chosen, who worked overtime to be indispensable, who believed if she just loved hard enough they would notice her. I tucked the box into the back of the closet, not erased, not forgotten, just put away. Later that night I went for a walk. It had just rained and the sidewalks were shimmering with streetlight reflections. I passed a family coming out of a restaurant, a young mother, her arms full of leftovers, a father with a toddler on his shoulders giggling, a teenage daughter laughing at something on her phone. For a moment I felt that familiar pang, the one that used to ache like loss. But it didn't sting this time. It just passed. I don't know if I'll ever understand why some mothers can't love all their children the same way, or why being strong is mistaken for not needing love, or why the people who take the most often believe they've given the most. But I do know this: I can love without sacrificing myself. I can grieve without going back. I can let go without becoming cold. That's what grace is to me now. Not silence, not suppression, not sainthood, but the quiet, steady decision to live without resentment, to stop proving myself to people who were never watching, to stop bleeding for a family that only came knocking when they needed something stitched. I made tea before bed, lit a candle, sat with the stillness, and I realized I wasn't bitter. I was free. That's the part they'll never understand, that I didn't walk away to punish them. I walked away because I finally loved myself enough to stop begging for scraps. They left me out of the will, then asked me to pay for the funeral. I chose to bury it with grace.